Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 56, How to Fail a PhD in 60 Seconds. Now, this title actually started as a joke. One of my Times Higher Education articles was retitled on Twitter, How to Fail a PhD in 60 Seconds, and I found this terribly funny. I thought this was really amusing, and it wasn't really the task of the original piece to determine the failure in 60 seconds. My original article was really about sharing with students and supervisors and institutions around the world about those particular corrections discovered by examiners that serve to pound your mark, from straight through A right the way through to minor corrections, major corrections, revise and resubmit, an MPhil, and yes, a fail. So length of time, 60 seconds or otherwise, was not really the focus of that article. But when I saw that great title on Twitter, I thought, wow, I wonder if there are particular attributes or characteristics that examiners find really quickly that creates a concern and a worry for them. And the answer is yes, and that's the task of our vlog this week. Now, we always need to remind PhD and master's students that you are writing for two people. You are writing for two people, and those two people are examiners. The examiners have one job: to uphold the highest standards of scholarship. So it is that old cliche, you had one job, you had one job. Well, the examiners, they actually only have one job, and that job is not to make you feel happy, not to make you feel good about yourself, not to make you go, oh right, I've got 5 articles from this PhD, aren't I clever? That's not the examiner's role. Their job is to make sure that you have reached the international benchmarks of scholarship, that you've demonstrated academic protocols, originality, academic integrity. You have the capacity to read a large amount of materials, create an accurate synthesis, and then use that synthesis to build an original contribution to knowledge. Now, we as examiners have a series of proxies for all those attributes, and many of them, yes, do emerge within minutes of opening up your thesis. So we're now going to enter the dark art, or indeed the dark sociology of examiners and examiners' processes and examiner behaviour. What does happen in the first 60 seconds when an examiner opens the package to see a thesis or downloads that file? How to fail a PhD in 60 seconds? Let's do it. Number one, size of the thesis. Now, a key worry that emerges for me at the point that I download that file or I open that package is the size of the thesis. Here's one I prepared earlier. Here is a failed PhD. Now, I knew the moment that I unpacked this thesis that it was a failed PhD. And significantly, there were 3 examiners in this particular system. All 3 examiners gave this a hard, cold fail. So I opened it, saw the size of it, I went, we are really in trouble here. It's going to be a fail, and it was. Now, just to do a comparison, here is another thesis from one of my wonderful students, Dr. Leanne McRae. She's a very famous woman, great writer in her own right. I love you, Leanne, you're a star. That's Leanne's thesis. Went through AABs, that's a 1-1-2. Straight through, minor corrections. I believe the correction was she required more Madonna in the thesis. That was the time, Leanne, wasn't it? That was the time. We all need a bit more Madonna in our life. But that is a passed thesis straight through, just so you can see the size. So if the thesis is short in length, then that is often a proxy for the thesis being short in ideas. The point of a doctorate is you're meant to show mastery in a very small field. So you're needing to prove that you are an expert, yes, but also that you can control information. You need to demonstrate information literacy skills and the capacity to organise knowledge. So if I see a thesis that's the size of a coursework master's or indeed an honours, then that is heading for failure. Because part of what a PhD is the capacity to manage a large amount of information and organise it with skill. So if it feels like an honours dissertation, you are gone. 2, we look at the bibliography reference list. Now, when I open a PhD, and this is an internationally recognised practice of examiners, almost all of us go to the bibliography or reference list first. So we read it, if you will, from the back. So what am I looking at when I'm going to a reference list or a bibliography? There are 3 things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for completeness. I'm looking for a high number of references from the last 2 years. And I'm also looking for a correct referencing style. Well, obviously, a correct referencing style is an academic protocol. You can't reference. Thanks for playing. It's over. So, correct referencing style is a benchmark expertise competency. But I also want to see a broad range of scholarly sources. I want to see that you as a candidate understand this field with breadth and depth. And I also want to see a large number of references from the last 2 years. I need to see that you are working at the edge of knowledge. Now, one of the great problems, in fact, I think it is the greatest problem of long candidatures, so those students that have been enrolled for a very, very, very long time, is that their references are dated. By the time they submit, their reference list looks old and it looks tired. Remember, you're trying to prove that you have made an original contribution to knowledge. To prove an original contribution to knowledge, you have to read everything that's occurred in the last 2 years in particular to prove, to verify you are operating at the cusp of knowledge. Now, if most of your references are from 2008 and 2009, that's a long, long time ago now, and it looks dated. It looks tired. So what I'm suggesting is, yes, you must include all your important sources. You must. But remember, I'm also looking for absolutely contemporary sources, the edge of knowledge. Completeness matters. But if I, as an examiner, if I've been asked to be an examiner, I know this field incredibly well. I read a great deal, and I read emerging scholarship. Remember, people like me read at least 10 scholarly monographs a week, at least 30 to 4 articles every week. I try to do a lot more than that, but I also seek out emerging, interesting knowledge in emerging and interesting journals. So if you're missing something, I will know, and I will know within 60 seconds. 3, textbooks and dictionaries. Oh yeah. Now, I'm just going to offer one more of these how to fail in 60 seconds tips with regard to the reference list and the bibliography, because it is that important. If I see basic textbooks, if I see dictionaries in a reference list, let alone as references within the thesis, then I lose the will to live. I lose the will to live. A PhD that I failed in the UK during the oral examination, and can I say both the 2 independent examiners came to the oral exam failing that thesis, so it was an independent recognition that, wow, this is problematic. Now, that failure was based on unbelievably basic textbooks from the United Kingdom and the United States. So what happened was the student just peppered their bibliography with this really basic stuff, so the thesis looked really basic. So this student in particular, was talking about really complicated ideas. Structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, in front of the 2 experts in the field. Don't take any prisoners with people like us, okay? And their interpretation was wrong at worst or basic at best. And this was caused by their reading. I went to the bibliography and the most basic nonsense was there. And if you read nonsense, you will write nonsense. Always read the original. high quality refereed articles. Push yourself. I know it's tough. I know some of that material is difficult, but you're a bright person. Push yourself, stretch yourself, demonstrate the ability to read at the cutting edge of knowledge. And know that if I see an undergraduate or a coursework master's textbook or a dictionary that's cited or in your bibliography reference list, I become Catherine Tate rather than your examiner, and you have to take the shame. Right. 4. Organisation of ideas. Now at Flinders University, and still probably just the majority now of Australian universities, you do not have an oral exam. And you might be going, woo, I don't have an oral exam. Yeah, that's fantastic. Let me just correct you a little bit. That means all your examiners have is your script. So if something goes wrong in that script, you do not have the chance to justify it. So all you've got, your only capacity to show your wares is in the written presentation of the PhD. So if you don't know how to construct a paragraph, if your organisation of ideas is a bit chaotic, then you're gone. In systems with oral examinations, candidates are given a little bit more space to manoeuvre. So if we as examiners find flaws in the PhD, we log those down as the basis of questions for the oral exam, and you can justify it and speak back to us. Now in most Australian universities, still just about, you only have the script to sell your expertise. So if there is anything wrong with the organisation of ideas in this thesis, you haven't got a plan B. You haven't got an oral exam to justify what you're doing. So please remember, the presentation is everything. 5. Poorly written thesis and or the use of an editor. Now I've got, I think, 5 PhD students submitting in the next 3 weeks. I love them all, but it's going to be a tough few weeks. But I am telling my students who are preparing their final script right now, and none of them are using an editor, I'm telling them to state in the acknowledgements that they have not used an editor and they are responsible entirely for the writing and the drafting of their PhD. So if you use an editor, that is your choice. But I believe if students choose not to use an editor, they do the heavy lifting to improve their prose, then they deserve the credit for that, and the examiner should know that they've done the heavy lifting on the prose. So when I see in the acknowledgements that an editor has been used, I become somewhat uncomfortable. Because, to be frank with you, I don't really know what I'm examining. Where is the line between what the student has done in terms of drafting the prose and what the editor has done? Now, I lost that battle a couple of years ago. As most of you know, Steve and I fought pretty hard in Australia to stop the use of editors on a PhD. And once more, as always, we failed. But you have to recognise, team, that examination is as much about impressions as it is about regulations. I'll say that again. Examination is as much about impressions as regulations. So if you decide not to use an editor, you deserve credit for that. State that in the acknowledgement. And the language we're coming up for my students at the moment is, please note, an editor has not been used in the construction of this thesis, full stop. Now, it is important that examiners have this information. They need to know that it's your data collection, your interpretation, your analysis, and yes, your writing and drafting. 6, short introduction. Yeah. Now, after I've looked at the reference list, after I've looked at the abstract, my next step is to go to the introduction. And once more, length is crucial here. If the introduction is under 5 pages, I know we are in trouble. The introduction sets the scene. The introduction configures the landscape of the knowledge that's being configured and presented in this thesis. It answers the questions. Why am I reading this? Why should I care? What's important here? What are the big questions that we're answering through this scholarship? So a short introduction shows that the candidate has no understanding about the value and the significance of their research. 7. A short conclusion. Now, a short conclusion is nowhere near as serious as a short introduction, but what a short conclusion reveals is a tired candidate. Hey Amy, a tired candidate because they simply ran out of words. But the mark does tumble when I see a short conclusion. And this has happened to me twice when I've been examining, about to give the student an A, that is a 1, in the Flinders model. So I'm about to let the student go straight through. This is a fantastic thesis. I'm going, oh, this is terrific, this is brilliant. I turn to the conclusion. It's a 2-page conclusion, and in those 2 pages, the candidate tumbles from an A1 straight through to major corrections, a C or 3. And of course, what's the major correction I ask for? Write a conclusion. 8. Messy formatting, 1 for Vicky. I flick through the pages of a thesis, or I scroll the digital document as it's downloading, and if I see page lengths of different sizes, blank pages, I see diagrams oddly positioned, weird stuff happening with text, and it looks a bit chaotic, then I often read formatting problems as a problem in scholarship. So don't rely on a Microsoft template to organise your thesis. It is the path to madness. Students are increasingly spending their days wrangling with their template, and Vicky, I will share this. Vicky spent, I think, 3 days trying to get a Microsoft template to just give her 1 line rather than 2. So, it is the path to madness, but Vicky's still with us. The resultant scripts, of course, the problem when you use a Microsoft template is all the scripts we're receiving all look the same. And that's all a bit boring, and it's all a bit, oh, here we go again, here's another template for a dissertation, that's great. And they often reveal the same structural errors. So when I see a chaotic presentation, I often think, wow, that's a proxy for something else. Is this chaotic research? And I read the script in a different way, because it can also suggest a rushed submission. So with a digital submission, get your pages right and be really sure, really comfortable, then PDF it, fix it, and then optimize your PDF and really check what you are submitting. 9. Originality is not specified in the abstract. The abstract is everything in your PhD. It is the second thing I read after the bibliography reference list. If the candidate is presenting synthesizing ideas and they do not present a sentence in their abstract, my original contribution to knowledge is, so unless they finish that sentence, my original contribution to knowledge is, and there's something there, then I'm scratching a bit in the thesis, to be honest with you. I'm looking about trying to find the spark of originality in the thesis. If I'm having trouble finding originality, then I start to worry that this is a master's thesis. So what are the characteristics of this? I can tell you precisely. See it a lot. The literature review is long. So it's a long literature review, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and you go, wow, really, really, really? So we've got this incredibly long literature review, and then I move, oh, terrific. Now we're moving to the methods chapter, and this is riveting. And page after page, really yawny stuff. So remember, that's the what, the literature review is the what, the methods is the how, and you need both. But like, okay, team, are we moving to something here? Are we moving to something? Hello? And the student is unable to specify the original contribution to knowledge, the why of the thesis, then I'm suddenly going, wow, well, half of this thesis is literature review and methods. I'm not seeing originality here. I'm seeing a synthesis, and that is a master's degree. 10. New one. The supervisor did not sign off the examination paperwork. Now these days, and this is really new, this is from the last 3 to 5 years, these days examiners get a lot more information than we ever did in the past. So we get a confirmation of academic integrity. We often get a Turnitin report these days. If publications do exist in the thesis, with great precision they are specified. So if there is some form of publication there, to match it against the Turnitin report, we require a clear presentation of, right, what was the role of the authors here? What was the role of the authors in design, in the interpretation, in analysis, and in the writing? And that has to be specified and signed off by all authors. Why? Because the examiner must be able to guarantee that the work that he or she is examining is the work of that student. Remember, this is a Doctor of Philosophy, the highest degree we have at a university, and it is given to an individual. So an examiner must be certain that the work that he or she is reading is the product of that student. And if we have any doubt at all, we send the thesis back to the institution. We send it back. I've sent 5 theses back to ask for a confirmation of, I'm uncertain about the percentage of authorship in this particular piece of work between these pages. Can I please receive a confirmation from all authors there? Thanks very much. Then I'll proceed the examination. And that's what's occurred. But in such a system, it becomes very, very clear with all this paperwork if a supervisor has not signed off the examination. And that means for some reason they haven't read the final version. And that suggests to me as a proxy that the supervisor does not believe that it will pass. So if I have seen any sense that the supervisor has not signed off this thesis in the paperwork supplied by the university or in the acknowledgements that you write. So for example, that lovely acknowledgement page that you often write at the start of the thesis, you thank your parents, you thank various deities, you thank your friends, you thank your Labrador, you thank your hamster, and all of that's great, but then you don't thank your supervisor. I move from calm to DEFCON 5 in about 6 seconds. So be aware of that. I feel worried, I feel nervous that something bad is about to happen. Okay. Now, blogs around the world, when they talk about examination, particularly when they're written by former PhD students, is they state, oh, it's almost impossible to fail a PhD. That's wrong. Every institution on this planet, every year, has failed PhDs. Don't think this doesn't happen. It does happen all the time. But I think what these bloggers are trying to convey is that mostly our PhD students leave a graduate program before it moves to examination if something's going wrong, or indeed they're asked to leave the program. So the problematic students and or research don't ever actually make it to examination. That's sort of true, but theses do fail. And for me, a lot of this does come down to supervision. You know how I believe in high quality supervision. It's what we're meant to be doing in our universities. And you know what I'm looking for from a supervisor is somebody who has got a large number of PhD students through. Often as the principal or as the sole supervisor, 20 plus getting students through, that's often a good sign. Now also, have they got those students through without relying on what I refer to as the star chamber? That is, they give their students' theses to a group of mates and each of them take turns examining their own PhD students. Now, there are a series of star chambers, particularly in the United Kingdom, in particular disciplines, and why that's so sad is within a couple of generations of PhD students, because of the low standards and the lowering standards that happen when you examine by star chambers, those disciplines have declined in quality. So does your supervisor know the line between pass and fail? Does your supervisor know the line between major and minor corrections? And always, please, please, please remember your audience. This is a PhD. It is not a journal article. Refereeing and examination are two very, very different entities, behaviours and practices. Examiners are making a statement, an international transparent statement about the quality and the originality of your research. You will produce hundreds of refereed articles, but you'll only ever have one PhD. So therefore, all I ask of you is that you respect the process. And in the final year of your PhD, start to look at your thesis not as a student, not even as a supervisor, but start to consider it as an examiner. What are you doing? What are you presenting that may cause concern or worry for those two people that are going to assess this work? Think of the triggers and the concerns that you may be creating that may result with examiners worrying about your thesis in some form. So remember, your priority is to calm the examiner, relax the examiner, show that you are a fine scholar that understands the genre of a PhD and understands the expectations of a PhD. And yes, those first 60 seconds really do matter. And my respects and my love to all the staff at the Times Higher Education. They've been so incredibly important to my career, and they provide such a great service to this planet and higher education. And as always, I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.